Good morning, Prof. Good morning, Dr.
Hello,
Good morning, sir.
Hello, Toby. Good morning.
good
Morning.
morning.
Sure.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third session of our research ethics course and complement of the season. This morning, we'll be having a discussion on ethical issues relating to different type of research. And no doubt, we have an expert trainer in this, the model of ethics, bioethics in Nigeria, the person of Professor Morenike Upong, who will be taking us to the session. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I'm laughing. The mother of bioethics. I won't take that title. I think Professor Mrs. Fallacy is the mother of bioethics. I met her there and she was the one that inspired me. Thank you for those kind words. Thank you everyone also for being here. I know it's Christmas season, it's holiday season, but thanks for keeping on. As usual, we will share with you the insights we had garnished from the platform discussion. I do agree that this discussions are really rich. And I think if together as a team, we can pull this up into a manuscript or a report, a white paper report that we send to NREC, I think it might be impactful. I hope that's the way we'll go at the end of the meeting because they've been really rich and insightful. So we had two case studies. The first case study was looking at what it is that you would do to resolve critical ethical, or what are some of your critical ethical questions that you would like to resolve to make a decision to be a team member on a qualitative research that is exploring the experiences of survivors of a natural disaster. The second was also one that was looking at experimental investigation into a novel pharmaceutical medication, and it was asking issues that you might want to consider around data integrity, conflict of interest, vulnerable populations, and the data collection and analysis process. So we had this 7 emerging themes from the discussions, and we'll go through them one by one. When it came to ethical considerations with respect to those two case studies, many of us raised issues around informed consent, that it was important that we get consent, and there were issues about consenting vulnerable populations, especially children and patients in the hospitals. We do appreciate that one, patients in the hospital may very well not know what's consent, the ramification of consenting, and therefore might just participate in research because physician who is conducting the research is also providing care. We do know the conflict of what that is when a physician providing care is also recruiting patients for the care, no matter what you talk about in terms of freedom of engagement. In this place where we have an hierarchical relationship and the doctor continuously seems to be the superior, there is no way the patient would say no to their research participation because there is concern that they're not participating in their doctor's research would compromise their care. So for this kind of thing, it is often advised that the doctor should stay independent of the process and have some autonomous agents or support to actually do the consenting. Of course, it's the same thing with vulnerable populations. If you do want to work with vulnerable populations, the risk, because they know they have no agency or no autonomy of power, the ability to be able to say no or resist abuses is also very limited. So these are some of the things we want to look at. Thanks for many and all of you that kept raising that when you're dealing with this research among vulnerable populations, you have to take special precautions because of the need to ensure that properly consented. Another issue that came up was about risk. And we'll be answering the question I raised this morning on the last slide. We did acknowledge that psychological risk, financial risk, and physical risk are associated with research participation. For the first case study, we were concerned about the re-traumatizing and the compensation plan for this. What is it that you ought to prepare in that plan? So when we are going into a research where the risk of re-traumatizing is very high, it is very important to place care, to institute care measures. And this is one of the things the research committees should do and research planners should do. So once you are, for example, you are doing a study that is asking people about their history of sexual abuse, sexual violence, in this case, remembering the history of trauma during natural disaster, you're asking people how they dealt with death, and so many kind of research, even though they are questionnaire research, they're intrusive with the risk of causing emotional trauma or psychological trauma. You can't compensate with finances here, but you must put measures in place to support them. So they must have access to psychological care. Your research must plan and budget to ensure that if your questioning or your investigation reopens old ones, they have access to psychological care. That is a measure. We talked extensively about the financial risk that is continuously happening in our environment, where physicians or hospital research is taking place, and you kind of integrate research into clinical care or patient's care, and therefore transfer the cost of care to the patient. For example, I'm doing a malaria study and the patient has to come back all the time. The fact that that patient would normally come to the hospital, the minute a clinical care is changed to a research, you have to bear the cost of that person coming to the hospital. The fact that this patient, if we came normally, would have done a malaria parasite test, the fact that that clinical care has become a research, you have to bear the cost of that test. But what do we see in the environment, very sadly? And I still read it early this year and I was still shocked. You find out the patient, not only do they bear the cost, but the cost of extra investigations that is related to your study, it is transferred to the patient. We therefore have to do a lot more than just complaining in the environment. In a little way, we have to continuously educate people about their rights. Many of you here are in societies, are in churches, are in mosques. You can organize a research education program for your people so that they understand their rights and the right to ask questions when they go hospital care or any research whatsoever. This is something we've done in the past with my team, and you find out that people are empowered and therefore ask clarifying questions when researchers come to meet them. Of course, we still have in this environment where research is presented as service. Research is presented as service. It's very sad, and that's one of the things I still see with the ethics committee, who are in themselves subjective assessors, because they also work in the space and do the same things and bring in that subjectivity they otherwise would not review protocols appropriately. So yes, we did discuss about participants' risk and safeguards. We'll be looking at the two other risks that is possible in research. We did note that no research is free of risk. It can only be minimum risk, moderate, or high risk. Minimum when it is the same risk you go through every day of your life. And that is when it can go through exempt review. When it's moderate risk, you might go through expedited review. You have a questionnaire survey. It's moderate risk because the person could have used their time for any other thing, okay? And then, of course, we also gave an example of physical risk. Somebody is on a clinical trial that takes a drug. Because of the drug, the person is dizzy and while driving, and then the person has an accident. That's because of the research. Or people are coming to your hospital. Apologies, I'm in biological sciences, so I keep talking about hospitals. So they keep coming and then they have an accident, not because of the drug, but because if it's not because of the research, there's nothing that will bring them through that route. Nothing. That's not their route. But because they have to come visit you, they take that route and then they have an accident and then have limb trauma and the limb has to be amputated. That's physical risk associated with participating in your research. And compensation otherwise needs to be given. So transparency and dissemination was also something we discussed, and we noted that it's the ethical responsibility of researchers to disseminate their research findings to stakeholders. You want to disseminate it to policymakers, to whoever there is, so that they can use your results. If you are working on something that is of policy importance, you develop policy briefs and send it using a language they can understand to the policymakers so that they can use it. But more importantly, these people, the stakeholders, should have been involved in the design and implementation. I'm always very surprised when people feel that they cannot disseminate their results to research participants. Because when you wanted to do the study, it was not difficult to find and recruit these participants. The term of dissemination now becomes challenging. It's about appropriate budgeting. You need to disseminate results to participants. And I recall applauding Professor Asuzu, whose students, his community health students, he makes sure they disseminate results, and they have seen transformation because the participants use the results and enhance themselves. It is not okay that we as researchers continue to generate data from communities, and the community where we work are not better off because of our research. This is something ethics committee should do, and it is an ethical obligation. Please look at every ethics document there is in the world. Dissemination is an ethical consideration. You must disseminate results, whether it's positive finding or negative finding, so that people can build on the evidence you have generated to move to the next level. We truly do not have time to waste. We are all towards working towards an answer. So if you have done something and has shown result, whether it's negative or positive, we'll learn from it and we can build on that rather than not disseminating. And there's an assumption that it has not been done. On that note, I would like to encourage teachers that are here that please, one of the ways people are going forward is that even students' research are done in a way properly, proper training to enable them disseminate the studies data. And it is advisable that your students do part of your research. Many of the research work you do, there are multiple facets, and your students can take part of that facet to do their research so that their results are incorporated into what you're doing. Wastage is no longer feasible. Wasting people's time to answer questionnaires that have no impact, no relevance. It's not the way to go anymore. Another issue that came up clearly was subjectivity in decision-making. And some of you raised the potential for bias even with the Research Ethics Committee in taking decisions around protocol. And I did share that in the absence of clear guidance to govern ethics review processes, subjectivity will always happen because people, by their bias, be it their geography, their upbringing, their culture, their church, their mosque, their religion, we are all biased human beings. We only minimize or manage those bias when we are trained to understand the impact and how to be objective, even when our biases exist. I can tell you a number of examples how biases have informed Research Ethics Committee. One of such study was when the Savi trial came into Nigeria. Savi is a surfactant, and past studies have shown that as a surfactant, it does disrupt the desmodium of the cell linings. And therefore, when Savi is used as a microbicide, in which case they insert this into the vagina, it disrupts the epithelium, causing ulcers. I'm just over exaggerating so that people not in the biology can understand. And therefore, this kind of research had been rejected in high-income countries. When they brought it to Nigeria without making mention of the Research Ethics Committee, the Research Ethics Committee accepted that research. On what grounds? Oh, they are female sex workers. The participants are female sex workers. They need anything to prevent HIV in their population without properly looking at the science. Of course, the research was stopped midway by data safety and monitoring boards because it increases the risk of the participant to HIV. They never disseminated their results, sadly. But that was the result, and they had to stop it. Whereas The science had shown before they accepted. The science was there. Science was there. But they're in the blindness of their bias and thinking, oh, we're saving female sex workers. They forgot to look at the science and chose to let that research go. So yes, I do agree with you that without guidance, many of us and our subjectivity might overtake our decision-making process. It's very important that we understand the many things that inform our individual biases, our culture, our religion, our upbringing, our education. They're all things that inform our biases. More recently, I'm doing a lot of work around decolonization of research. Without a consciousness of the bias, you would think that's the way it goes. And yet, these biases inform the design, implementation, and interpretation of the research results. It's just like when a white person sees your what happens, polygamy. Polygamy does not exist in their system. And so polygamy is wrong, and everything they would interpret around polygamy would be negative. But in a system, if it's an African interpreting that, who understands the fundamentals driving polygamy and the safety within the polygamy practices, it cannot interpret that same result and give the discussion that kind of flavor. So we must understand, we all must understand that our personal biases, our institutional biases might influence research. It is understanding and being aware of that starts the step of us de-abusing ourselves and being a lot more objective. And one of the ways to do this is collaborative research, because that way multiple diverse perspectives are brought in and it moderates everybody. It's diverse. Why don't you say this angle? Oh, no, it's not always like that. That diversity of thought, allowing that diversity in the inclusive process of conducting research improves the quality and addresses the potentials for bias. Of course, if all the people that will come in are just everyone like you or your friends or your group of, men, of course, it doesn't address diversity and bias. But diversity helps to address, yes, bias. We also talked about equity and fairness, and I once again reiterated the need for reimbursement. Of course, we did highlight the difference between compensation for harm and reimbursement for participants' cost. One of the things I do, even when I do international research, is when I have to engage people on calls, I reimburse for their internet use because it's my research. In this environment, other places, internet cost might be nothing. Everybody is routine, but yeah, every 1 hour is somebody's money, and it's something. So I reimburse for internet cost. Though most times when I put it, I say, if you want it, please ask for. And those that ask, I give them. So reimbursement for participants' costs must be taken into consideration. We talked about that in terms of financial harm. However, when there's a problem, when the risk occurs, the payment or addressing that risk is what is called compensation. And this ensures fairness to participants, especially in resource limited settings. It's a big deal here, and it's something we must. But once again, I can't overemphasize the need for participant empowerment. We need to find ways of continuing to educate our communities on their research rights so that they can demand. That's two-way things. The Research Ethics Committee must undergo research training every 2 years for them to be relicensed. There are many ethics committees that are not relicensed. And researchers must know and ask. If they submit their protocol, are you licensed? They say no. Drop your protocol there. Go to a place where it's licensed, because when trouble comes, you and them will go under. So we need to educate our communities about this licensing. The Research Ethics Committee should educate their constituency about research rights. You can organize for your community, once again, churches, mosques, your organizations. You all have social organizations. Let people be aware. I have been involved in an organization that this consecutively for over 5 years, and we saw research. You know what happens when in the places where we did this kind of training, you find that people want to ask questionnaires. The first thing they'll ask, where's your ethics clearance? Because and then people stop and then they go, and it has been successful. I have been at a major meeting, IBBIS, where they were presenting that major national program. So because the community said, well, we weren't involved. Where's the ethics clearance? Well, how did you get involved in the design? They had to stop and go back. And so when communities are involved in that design or know their rights, the risk of abuses is also less. And then people start to do the right thing. And it's happening everywhere. We need to educate communities about this research. And you and I can do it. Just start a small WhatsApp group with whatever you're doing. Disseminate, even if it's just posting these things. Let people be educated about the right, and we start to see a lot more people doing things. And this was, of course, talked about stakeholder engagement. When we're doing the research, remember, when we're doing the research, it's not just enough to say we want to disseminate the result to stakeholders. Let them be involved in the process, in the design, and then they will own it and they will run with it. And then we're giving power back to the people. I remember when I was at Luce for a talk once, they were celebrating an anniversary. And I stood up and challenged them. I said, you don't celebrate an anniversary. People should celebrate the anniversary for you. And that if you, Luth, you're an Idiaraba, and you have made positive impact by your clinical care and your research on the people of Idiaraba, they are the ones that would have put on their agbada and gele and celebrated for you. But no, you haven't. Through Luth, you see stagnated water at their gates and creating mosquito bites, mosquito problem at Idiaraba. And then they can't even come to the hospital to take care because the cost of your care is expensive. They are not celebrating you. We can also think the same of our institution all over. How do we give back to these communities? We do research and continually exploit our researchers. And I say the same for IFE. I say in IFE is hosted my university for 60 years. We've produced over 2,000 professors. But ask me, is IFE better for having Faculty of Education? Is IFE better for having College of Health Sciences? Our health indices are not different from Igbo that does not have a university. Neither is the education indices better. There's no difference. You make no impact. This is exploitation. It's as good as the Niger Delta exploitation by Nigeria. There's so many of us like that. We extract and extract and extract data. We never give back. So stakeholder engagement is a way of ensuring that early in the research, they are part of it so that they can take away the learning to improve themselves. And we must find a way of institutionalizing this as a practice so that we start to look at ways of disabusing the continuous exploitation of the communities we do. So exploitation is not only from the north, but we ourselves within ourselves exploit. But the exploitation may just be because we don't know what is right. And therefore, we have the right to educate people so that they know what is right. And in this education, we also need to help people understand how to balance the ethics principle, where we're navigating competing interests, which is the subjectivity we bring on course, into addressing societal benefits rather than individual interest. And we want to note that, please note that even when we're balancing, everything is a balance. Societal benefits will always, when we balance risk and benefits, once benefit outweighs the risk, such research would go, but we cannot not recognize that the few people that will be facing risk, they need to be cared for. And that is why every researcher must think through all the risk and plan for all the risk. I read ethics protocols and people say there's no risk. It's not true. You must know there are risks. You must know the risk and then plan for the risk so that the few that are facing the risk for the good of the majority, they cannot unduly suffer for that reason. Finally, we talked about ethical preparedness, ensuring that our protocols are comprehensive. That protocols must include details about participant selection, risk minimization, and how we manage our data. We ought to look at vulnerability considerations, especially putting in place special protections for vulnerable people because they cannot report. They can't report, for example, a female sex worker that the researcher abused. Which police station is she or she going to go? Doesn't exist now. So we must appreciate that and put those measures in. And also when we're selecting populations, balance and be sure that we're not excluding people just because of our own biases and subjectivity. And please ensure that our justification is such that there's benefit for the society. And the benefit of research must outweigh the risk. It's about the people, not about your promotion. It's about the people, not about your manuscript. It's about the people, not about the number of papers you're publishing. It's about the people. Education and advocacy role, we had mentioned that let's have a movement. Know your research rights. Let's have a movement to empower people. And we must also be invested in training and equipping researchers with knowledge about ethical principles and the application of those principles. For more and more, let's start to educate our students, our teams, our laypersons. There's everybody to train. There's a movement. Let's make a difference. Finally, let's answer the issues about forms of risk. On the platform, we talked about physical risk, psychological risk, and financial risk. The other two forms of risk is social risk and legal risk. Social risk can happen when you're not taking cognizance of the impact of your research on the harm it can bring for social standings, relationships, reputations, privacy loss, stigma, and interpersonal conflict. I'll give one or two examples. I remember there was a case report of a community in America that went to court and won. And I'll explain why. When you publish your result and say, oh, the genetic genes of those in Nigeria make their IQ less than that in Ghana. I repeat, your genetic study, when you did it, you are now reporting that the genetic profile of those in Nigeria makes their IQ lower than that in Ghana. Do you know the implication? Nigerians won't get a job now. They can't compete with other people because of your research. That's a social risk for the country to participate. And it was something like that happened in America, in Canada, that community, and they closed their doors. So people don't come out, except they invite you to come and do research. You can't go there to do research. The same thing is also happening in a community in South Africa. You can't, I think it's the Kruger or something, there's a community like that. You can't, so don't come. When we invite you, you come. Because in the process of our research, we promote stigma. In Nigeria, it has happened. Very early days of the research. I'm sure you would know. If you don't have to be in biomedical sciences. When the results came out and it says the HIV was the most prevalent in Benue, till today, the people in Benue are bearing that social risk. Because when you want to marry somebody in Benue, they will tell you, Benue, don't do your HIV test. Too. It was a major problem for them. That declaration as far back as 1980 something, because there was no sensitivity to issues around stigma. And then we open up population to stigma for life. So there are many things we do in a way that's why there must be the diversity and people, and then the research ethics committee who are trained to see these things and can help moderate them. And finally, there's the issue of legal risk, which are consequences for disclosing special sensitive information without us doing robust safeguard. I'll give you an example. No, two examples. I was involved in a research that collected data from a dental hospital. For some reason, they did not close, the identifier. The names were there. And lo and behold, I'll tell you another story. My brother's daughter's name was in that list. Imagine it was a terrible issue. And I'll tell you one about a terrible issue. I couldn't believe it. I was seeing it. My brother's daughter, that's my niece, had already been to the dental hospital. and I could see approval. Imagine there was something more than that. And I'll tell you about this other one. There was this student in Sweden that was involved in the research. They collected data, and they didn't de-identify. There and then, he found out that his grandfather was an homosexual. He found out that his grandfather, because he had access to that data that was not identified, that got that boy into depression, and it broke his relationship, destroyed the excellent working relationship he had with his grandfather. Of course, it was a legal case. So these are the kind of things we talk about. Without thinking through everything we do, looking at it through the lenses of the 4 principles, looking at it through the lenses of the risk that we might bring, not weighing the values of what we do. And when we're self-centered and thinking about ourselves, we expose people to risk. I think on this note, I'll keep quiet and look forward to people that will bring questions. Could you please let me ask me to ask questions, and if there are people who want to ask questions or contribute to this discussion, please also raise up your hand. Finally, these are the insights, a summary of the insights and reflections. Our discussion on the platform last week on the lines that there's complexity in conducting ethically sound research. It's not as straightforward as ABC. Once we understand the principles, once we understand the issues, understand subjectivity, then it will be easier. But to assume that it is just that straight is not understanding and identifying the complexity, especially in resource constraint setting. And like we noted on the case on the disaster context. And what we've done extensively in our discussion is highlight the interplay between systemic challenges and individual responsibility, which underscores the need for us to continuously undergo education and robust ethical, and there must be robust ethical frameworks, not only for the IRBs, but for our institutions that we work with. And to note that subjectivity remains a challenge, we must understand that all of us bring our biases. Our position is not global position. Our position is not global position. We must understand that. And in understanding the subjectivity we bring, we are able to step back and choose to hear other voices that will help to ameliorate the biases we bring. We are more of a listener than a speaker. We are less of enforcing our ways than reaching consensus. And this way, our decision-making will be better, especially when we bring this mindset to collaborative research. On that note, I'd like to keep quiet and open the space to Kudus. Do we have any questions?
Thank you very much, ma. I think we have a question already, but I would ask that we can raise our hands if you want to speak. But I'll pick the first question. That's from Oluwakemi Showale. Thanks, Prof. How can all these social risks emanating from past mistakes be addressed? I guess he or she's asking about mistakes that have occurred in the past. How do you?
I think that's an excellent question. I think what we can do is to prevent it from happening going forward, rather than trying to look at what happens with research history is that we learn from it to improve the future. We learn from it to improve the future. Where it's possible to undo the past, yes, we go about that. But most importantly, learn about the future and let's take it back. And just to note also, Doshima, I see that the issue about Prof and LUTH is a reflection of all institutions in Nigeria. I just use LUTH because the story is real and it happened in LUTH, and I said these things, that's why I'm saying it. But LUTH is a reflection. I just thought of my own institution. We're 60 years old. We're exploiters. Our the education profile in Ife is not different from any other place that doesn't host a university institution. And that is all we do. We are not conscious of deliberately ensuring. It's just like going to America. Boston hosts a lot of research institutions. Boston is better off. Boston is academic. They know. You go to places that host research institutions, that the community is better off because they give back. Not here. We just keep collecting blood and data, and who's this person that can't close the mic? Please shut the mic. Or produce help shut the mic. So yes, we can learn from history and drive and make the future better by not keeping quiet. Over to you, Kudus.
Thank you very much, Matt. Related to that, the second question is asking how do we know? Sorry, how do we start the movement? Know your research rights in Nigeria.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's just an hypothetical thing. You can do little, even if it's just 2 students doing your lectures. Start a WhatsApp group and share information, even if that is as passive as that. I know your research rights for me is just an hypothetical situation, but there are people actively working in patients' community that are working with patients. Know your rights. Know your rights. I've worked in the HIV space and it's very strong. Oh, those HIV people living with HIV, they know their rights. So you can't mess with them. But it took people choosing to educate them. So it's we also. Truly, I don't know how to start. I'm doing my own little bits by doing this, organizing free trainings so that people can know what is right. So I think, yes, Lawrence, you can be innovative enough to make such movements happen. Thanks for the question. Over to you, Kudus.
Yes, ma'am. So we have some hands up, so I'll pick 2 of them, then go back to the chat. Sorry, okay. Olugbake, please. Okay, I'll mute it. Please go ahead.
Oh, good morning.
Please make
Thank
the
you very
question.
much.
Good morning. Make it brief
Okay.
and direct. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, like the 2 researches that you said, one about the genetics. Now, is it that such a research cannot be conducted again, or what would be a better way?
Excellent question. It's about the de-identifying. It's about the de-identifying. Okay. Let me take, for example, the Benue.
Sorry, let me just add a second question, so maybe you can tie the 2.
Let me take you one by one.
Okay.
Let me take you one by one. You'll be able to ask the second question. It's about the de-identifying. For example, let's say that Benue study. Let me go back to the Benue and then I can take the genetic. Rather than report and say Benue, I can say the prevalence of HIV is higher in North Central Nigeria. It's a time when stigma was high. Who would, not even now, maybe now it's better you might say Benue now. I don't think I would do that because stigma is still a problem. Stigma of people living with HIV is still as high as 70% in Nigeria because they do stigma index. So why would you, these people? So it's that sensitivity. So if I'd reported it as, HIV prevalence in North Central Nigeria is high, it's easier. Or I'm reporting a study. I said, I conducted a study in a tertiary institution rather than saying loose. It doesn't take away. So it's that de-identifying and understanding the concept. So even if we do genetic study, rather than saying Nigerian people, you anonymize the community. Just a minute, my battery is going down. Oh. Wow. This is major. Yeah. I have to get electricity. Wow. Show me that to find electricity. Please give me a moment. I have to see electricity urgently. Yeah. Okay. I got that sorted. All right. So I hope that answers the first question.
Yes, it does.
Okay. Please
it leads me on to the second. Now, the second was about the grandfather and the grandson. Now, if you're doing like a follow-up study and you're in a group, does that mean that everyone in the group cannot know the who the participants are?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Two things. Ideally, well, you train your group. What happens is that when you collect data, that you have to have the identifier because of things like a follow-up. Okay, no, let me first start. Anytime you collect a data that has an identifier, you must get informed consent from the participant to use that data. So for example, many people do in the hospital, you collect case notes and then extract information. Because the case note is with you, you have the identifier, you need to collect consent. If I went to biomedical records and I gave them my form, please extract the information. If that is the way I am collecting is blinded, the ethics committee would give you a waiver. So that's the first thing. The second thing, when you are in a research team and you're collecting data that will have to have the identifier, because you might have to go back, like a clinical trial or whatever, multiple times, you separate the information of the individual from the form. So the form has it, and then the data, you know that Folabi Folayan is number 1, but on the form, it is only number 1. So anybody that is even the research team only has access to number 1. They don't, very few, extremely few, 2-3 people like the PI and the study coordinator will have the identifier. So that it should be separated. Okay. And that way, whoever holds the form, the identifier are trained enough to understand the sensitivity of what they're dealing with, rather than collecting a data that has identifier and is accessible to the whole team. No. Practices wouldn't allow that. Do I answer your second question?
Yes, you do. Yes.
Excellent. I'm glad. All
Thank
right.
you.
Dr. Kudus?
Okay. Yes, Akintoye Famakinde, please unmute and go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, Prof. And good morning, colleagues.
Good morning,
Thank you
sir.
very much for the very informative lecture. Please, I want to remark that research exploitation is very rampant in Africa, and more importantly in Nigeria. So, and you see, these ones can be classified as a major research fraud that is ravaging the low-income countries. Now, if we want to now request for compensation, how can we balance this compensation and to distinguish it from inducement? Because in even the present economic situation in Nigeria now make people prone to exploitation the more.
Yes.
A little amount of 3 naira, 3,000.
Yes.
A lot of people will just go in and enroll in any research. So how can we
let me answer that. Can we balance that?
Okay.
It's an excellent question, on how to, to distinguish that now, apart from the fact that you've recognized that exploitation happens in the context of research. But the big thing is about doing the right thing. Let's do the right thing. Once you do the right thing in a way that the research, and, everybody has schools of thought, and I tell you, this is my own school of thought. Once you do the right thing in the right way, in a way that they have looked at it and you've minimized risk as much as possible. You've minimized risk as much as possible. And you have balanced your your reimbursement in a way that it does not become inducement. And I'll talk about inducement. Then there's nothing wrong. What is inducement? Let's say, my friend just gave this at the last bioethics conference. Christians can eat pork. Muslims can't eat pork. But because of your money, this research means I have to eat pork. This research I'm conducting would involve that I eat pork. Because of the money you are giving me for transport reimbursement, me as a Muslim that have not eaten pork for 40 years, And I say, there's nothing about it. Actually, people are eating pork. But there's nothing wrong. And then I go and eat pork because I want to collect your reimbursement. That is undue inducement. So that compensation is enough to motivate me to do what I would normally not do. That is not okay. So this is why the ethics committee are there. They kind of balance the amount you give in terms of reimbursement in a way that it would not unduly make people to otherwise do. Let me tell you an example. Somebody gave an example. Sometime Professor Adejumo, he's a bioethicist, that there was a research that happened in Ibadan, in the Ibadan Secretariat, that there was a queue of men. Geez, what happened? They were supposed to masturbate and give their semen for research participation. This is something people in Ibadan would normally not do. Give my semen, but the inducement was so much. The queue for that research. So I do agree with you that 3 naira might induce or 10 naira might induce, but there must be a balance in a way that the inducement is not undue. That is the word. Nobody says don't induce. It's undue inducement that is the wahala. And at the same time, you can't unnecessarily unduly exploit people. So there must be that balance. So in a way that you don't want to induce, you now say that you're not giving them anything, or you're giving them 2 naira for a trip that they will stay there for 5 hours, losing the money of their daily income. Remember that in Nigeria, the majority of people are daily earners. Now they will leave their job. They won't make sales that day. They will give their child to somebody to take care of because they're coming. And then you give them 1 naira. That's exploitation now. So it's that balance that, if you remember the summary, it's that balance that becomes challenging. But the ethics committee are trained. They are trained to be able to make that balance and make the judgment about what is right. I hope that answers your question. It was a long story. Does it answer your question, sir? Okay, cool.
I guess.
Let's go to the next.
So I got logged off and I missed some questions. I remember there's a very long question from someone from University of Ilorin. I don't know if you can.
I think there's one, yes. There's a question. I don't know if that's the person. Yes, from University of Ilorin. It says, thank you for an insightful, eye-opening lecture that further highlights the complexity of research ethics. Exactly. My question is about the social risk. Taking the Benue incidents as an example, how should the outcome of such a research have been communicated? I think I answered that. Because one will assume that putting the spotlight on an area with a high incidence of a particular infectious disease will increase intervention to tackle it. That is the reasoning. That reasoning lost the social impact. So without writing and publishing about Benue, it did not take away the ability to do an intervention. It did not, because it was government data. It did not. But that kind of level of public dissemination of information has given a backlash. That's even maybe how well does the intervention, because Benue people had to continuously till today. Not only was the Benue about HIV, they stigmatized their culture. They said, oh, the reason is because they're exchanging wives. I'll call it a foreign gaze. Because somebody from their judgment is coming to disabuse the culture, and they have to start defending themselves. So you can do that information. You can get information enough for programming without publishing to that will bring social risk. Okay. So how does one balance the risk of communication with results? It's about that sensitivity. If they went back to Benue or that place and asked what is happening, they will explain it to them. Because many times when we're explaining the result of our research, we're explaining it from our own context and our own understanding. That's our subjectivity we bring. If you go back to people, oh, we found this, what's the problem? They will tell you, they will explain it to you in a way that is real and meaningful and impactful, rather than our gaze trying to understand something that we're not a part of. I call it foreign gaze. And there's a brilliant piece by Sheye Abimbola that talks about foreign gaze, but it's from the context of global health and how the North foreign gazes the South. But we also locally also do foreign gazes. So I think for me, that's the way. I don't have a perfect answer. everything I'm saying are all evolving. Once again, all my own subjectivity, it's my own understanding I'm bringing. But I think once there's a solution, we can always find our answers. But answers can't be found in silos. We must converge, discuss, and then we'll get the answers. But there are answers somewhere. Yes, I mean, the answer, my friend, is flowing in the wind.
Yes,
It's blowing in the wind. All right, over to you, Kudus.
Okay.
I think there's one from Ido. Oh, yeah. Let me quickly take that. I don't know if you lost it. Under the briefing, I had one on the need to inform participants on deception and incomplete disclosure and research. Are those practices justifiable? If yes, yeah. If you read about that, I'm not sure it was here that would, yes, I think that came up in the session. The deception and incomplete disclosure and research, I don't think I answered that question. I said I was going to get back to it, and I think I'll go back to it. But from my brief understanding, deception can happen in research because you want to get information, but there must be complete disclosure. I do not understand that you can completely go away with incomplete disclosure. There must be. So the deception happens in a way that you generate information, because if they are aware, for example, I want to measure the number of times you blink your eye when I tell you, oh, this is research, informed consent, please sign. I want to measure the number of times that you blink in a minute. Your blinking pattern will change now, completely. However, I'll tell you, I want to do a research, but please, or I measure the number of blinking, I look at people, then I come back and tell you, I was doing this research and I need your consent now. If you want to participate, I needed to measure the blinking, but I couldn't tell you before. Some people will sign, some people say, don't include me, and then you don't include that person's data. For those that now, so that's where deception comes in, not like you deceive people. Or if you don't completely disclose, then I mean, you're truly not doing ethical research. You will come after. But once again, please let me take this back to the platform and go and answer this properly. This is coming straight from my head, but let me study it and give you answers. So there are places where I think it's justifiable, but I don't think there's anything called incomplete disclosure at the end of a research that is justifiable. No. All right. Over to you.
Thank you, Ma. I think Soyinbi has his or her hand up for a while. Please go ahead, Soyinbi.
Thank you so much, Prof. My question is simply that at what point in time can we make the study available to the participants, and to what extent the information we should make available to them in terms of after the publication or what have you? Yes, at what point in time do we make the findings available?
Excellent question. I think it's multiple-fold. Number one, if you involve the participants at the conceptualization stage and they're involved with you throughout the implementation, they know the result, because the community person that is with you is a representative and must continuously give back. If, however, you finished and you want to disseminate, I judge, I always put, my hand is always up that you disseminate before publication. And why am I very strong about this? It's because when you disseminate before publication, they would give you the appropriate interpretation of the findings rather than your own interpretation. So it becomes more robust and much more stronger. And the interpretation is a lot more valid. So I push for the point of disseminating the result before your final publication, because of that critical input. The worst is that, of course, if you wait till when there's publication, which is what happens in Global North. They publish before they, but I've worked with teams, especially my good friend Gita Ramji, who broke that jinx and said, look, that's your Global North. I am here. Once you're doing your research, I'm here. And I think it's wrong for them to be hearing the result of the result we did with them on the pages of newspaper. especially one that is going to have an impact on them. So she broke that jinx and went before publication. You know, they always do this thing. They put a bound on it. But, you know, you can't disseminate before. No, and she broke it and she did it and it was good, you know. So, yeah, those are stands. And I think one more, I've been doing a research in the field and more I'm thinking, look, there are local contexts to these ethics things. And we must start to redefine how our own local context shapes the application of these ethics principles so that we can truly apply them rather than pretending we're applying them and always breaking the rules in a way that we can't even report, you know. So I hope I answered your question, sir.
Sir. Thank you, sir, Prof. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes. You're welcome, sir. Yes, sir.
So I'll try to, because our time is fast spent, I'll try to combine two questions. So there are two questions. One is asking about guideline for reimbursement, or is it at the discretion of the researcher? Then should the researcher mention in the inducement after informed consent?
I don't. Well, let me first say about guidelines. But the inducement after research content, please, maybe you're going to have to read it out. There are guidelines. The decision about reimbursement is not guidelines related. It's the ethics committee that takes that decision. So you can put it in your proposals, you can put it in your budget. The final decision is made by the research ethics committee because they will take context into consideration. However, not all ethics committee asks for budgets, but there are some that ask for budgets so that they can look at these things. They want to be sure you have enough money to do the kind of research you want to do so that you don't unduly transfer costs. I have seen these things justified. I'm telling you, and I'm saying it because I've seen it, and it's a battle I can't fight alone. Where two dissertations in the environment, two dissertations are majorly hospital-based research, and because they don't have grants, they're transferring costs to patients, and the ethics committee is allowing it. Fought this battle for years. I'm only asking for more people to involve. It's wrong. It's wrong. You see somebody who has a malaria research, they will tell them to be checking checks next year, and it's the patient that pays for it. It's wrong. We are the ones exploiting ourselves. But having said that, do the ethics committee know what is right? And like we said, this is their own subjectivity because that is what they believe in and that they think is okay, just based on subjective feelings rather than applications of principles. So I don't even know what got me there, sir. There was a question. So there are no guidelines, yes. And I have a friend, Brandon Brown, in the US, who's been working on this for a year. The ability to make a guideline is difficult because when we write our research, when we publish, we don't write the reimbursement. Check it, we don't. It's after his piece of work, I started to write the amount of my reimbursement in my publications because people don't write it. There's no way to garnish that information and then make guidelines on how to take decisions around reimbursement. But then the research committees does that. It is not just the researchers that should think otherwise. Of course, your protocol should have as much information before it goes to the ethics committee, but then the ethics committee takes the final decision around reimbursement. Okay, the last question. We have 2 more minutes.
Okay, we have 2 more questions, ma'am. The first one is inducement. In addition, would mentioning it after informed consent is gotten help? I mean, mentioning this.
You don't say inducement. If you see the language of the informed consent, they will say this is the reimbursement. You must tell people the amount of reimbursement. Okay, so you can't hide it. And it's not after informed consent, it's part of the informed consent. Or this is not giving you a reimbursement. It's part of the 8 disclosures that you must do in informed consent. See the national guideline. The national guideline has very clear details about the 8 to 12. I think it's 12 in Nigerian guidelines. The details that must be in your informed consent are 12. And one of them is to say I'm not giving you or to say what it is that I'm giving you. Okay, final question. We have 1 more minute.
Okay, the duration of time to get response for
each. It should be in the informed consent. Oh, the duration. Oh, excellent question. The duration is supposed to be 90 days, the whole cycle. And if you don't get it, you have a right to go to the National Health Research Ethics Committee and complain. But please note, that 90-day cycle also has to do with you. Because if they ask you to send in your corrections and you don't send it in time, it extends the 90 days. And I know NIMA, if they give you, and they will remind you first time, second time you don't, they'll just talk it out. so that you don't keep saying that the ones that didn't do it in time. So the ideal time is 90 days. Many ethics committee probably don't keep to time. But once again, once you know your rights, you start to demand for your rights. Yes, on that note, I'd like to say thank you for being here. I think we are about on top of the hour. Kudus,
Yes,
over to you. And thank you for being here. We have one more week to go, and it's been really interesting. At least for me, I would like to say one of the things. This has been rich, and I don't want us to waste it. Maybe we'll come together and put a piece of paper from what we've generated from this excellent discussion. Thank you once again, and have a wonderful Christmas season. Over to you, Kudus.
Thank you very much. And we can continue the discussion on the WhatsApp platform. Do have a very great day. Bye. Ma, you can stop the recording from your hand.
Are you sure I can do that? Okay, let me
Yes,
see
ma'am.
how.
I lost the host to you when I was logged out.
Oh, okay. Kudus, let me give you still right to and you do your work.
I said just end the meeting then.
Okay. Once I end the meeting, the recording stops.
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm seeing something record. No, let me look for the recording. I must learn now. What's the big deal? Okay, stop recording. Yeah, I'll stop. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good day. Bye.
Yes.
Bye-bye. 1 hour is short. Bye-bye.
Toshima, skip it at 1 hour. God bless you, sister. How are you?
God bless you too. I'm good. Thank you so much, man. God bless you.
Out
Bye-bye.
of it, the network, the poor network was another issue on the 1 hour.
So sorry.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Prof, ma'am.
Thank you, Kadri, always coming. Thank you all of you. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Love you too, Madam Kadri. Bye.
Same to you, ma'am. Yes,
Bye.
ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Christmas, ma. Bye, ma.